Just after 9 a.m. on the East Coast, we are going to jump right into a conversation with Professor Harvey Kaye. Rebecca Azor is going to join us momentarily. We have so many more videos, so many more miles to cover, but I wanted to bring in Professor Harvey Kaye, who's a historian and sociologist, author of several books, including Thomas Paine's The Promise for America, The Fight for Four Freedoms, and friend of the show. Professor Kaye, thank you so much for joining us again. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Although, I was listening to your first segment there, the first hour, and, I'm still astounded that there are people who bought into the idea that, well, especially the Republicans who bought into the idea that the vaccine was some kind of grand plan, to crush the right or something along those lines. Anyhow, I hope people are listening.
I'm glad you started there, Professor Kaye, because I wasn't quite emotionally ready to let that go. Yeah. Because is it surprising to you? Can you think of any other time in history where even the powerful, we know, and through history that there's always been a casual dismissal of the life of Black people, of indigenous populations. Currently, there's a casual dismissal of life in the global South. There's clearly a dismissal of life in Yemen. There's a dismissal of life in Afghanistan. And I mean, we have an external dismissal of life, but did you ever think that the empire would have a dismissal of their own lives? The leaders and the rulers of this empire would just casually dismiss their own lives and the lives of their children because of the politics of COVID-19.
It would never ever have occurred to me. It would never have occurred to me, given the fact that we just had one of the most reactionary presidential administrations, which literally launched the effort in its own way to secure the vaccine. And for all of the idiocies that the president himself spouted, the fact was that it was in the course of his presidency that the vaccines were developed. So who would imagine? Who would imagine that the very folks who were the base of that particular party and especially that administration would actually respond to Fox News folks' dismissive remarks and literally place themselves in jeopardy? I was listening, and I think I even tweeted or not, messaged into the chat that, the Republicans are eager to suppress the vote of Democrats, especially African Americans and other people of color around the country, by way of legislation, and yet the Republicans also have seemed eager to wipe out their own base, given their dismissal of the imperative, first of all, of wearing masks. You will recall that it all began there, and
that's the thing, Professor Kaye, is that Republicans have become masters of pretending as though they are the oppressed.
Yeah.
They understand the philosophical and even literary advantage that the narrative of the oppressed gives people, and that's why they feign oppression. The war on Christmas, the war on Christianity. There is no war on Christianity in this country. There is no war against white people, but they know how to make critical race theory to be the boogeyman so that they can pretend to be oppressed. You actually wrote about something that I think is analogous to this in Senator Josh Hawley, and the Republican senator who is now creating this narrative of victimhood as it pertains to tech, the tech industry. Tell us about that article that you wrote for Common Dreams.
Yeah, well, I couldn't resist reviewing his book, The Tyranny of Big Tech, because it was striking to me that one of the foremost of the reactionary senators, the junior senator from Missouri, was going to go after big tech. And I knew enough from the remarks that were on the book that he was going to be calling for the breakup of big tech, which, by the way, and that's a fine idea, absolutely. But that was the striking thing, that here was this Republican. Look, Republicans are generally the champions of big capital, the champions of the corporate order. So how could it be that the foremost dimension of the corporate order was going to come under assault from a right-wing Republican? So I picked up the book, and what was striking was not the way he developed the argument specifically about big tech. There was nothing terribly original about his attack on big tech. It's, the degree to which it has monopolized our public culture in many ways, monopolized not only shopping, but so much of our public culture. But what he did is much of the book literally projects a radical democratic class struggle argument, which he mobilizes to go after big tech. What he said, is
I want to hold you there only because I want to contextualize for the audience. So when we say big tech, let's help the people really think Facebook, Amazon, Twitter, and then obviously some other tech companies, Apple, anything that you put in your hands or you log into in order to access this conversation or to have FaceTime with your grandbabies or your best friend or your bae. That's all big tech. And we all understand how ubiquitous it's everywhere. Every aspect of our life.
And I'll just add one. I'll just add one thing to that. We used to talk a great deal, and still in many circles talk about what's called civil society. That is the space of American life, which is neither government nor specifically the economy. Civil society encompasses labor unions, civil rights organizations, even, community associations, parent-teacher organizations, so on. Now, what people would say is the imperative for democracy is that we have open and free debate and discussion, and civil society is the place in which all of that takes place, out of which ideas are formed, the culture is created, and so on. We shouldn't forget that big tech literally has become our public square.
Yes.
In great part. So we have corporate operations, enterprises, in essence, shaping and controlling the public square, which, by the way, 20 years ago was the question of what about shopping malls? Were they public square or corporate space? So the critique of big tech that he offers is right on target. That's not what worries.
This is Senator Josh Hawley.
Hawley.
So the critique in his book, and this absolutely matters because this is one of the people who's absolutely going to stand in the way of our voting rights, and how they leverage big tech they leverage big tech, Facebook, social media, YouTube, they being Republicans. Conservatives have mastered the art of leveraging big tech to push back against our ability to vote and to participate and to have a fair democracy. So it really begs the question, what in the hell is Josh Hawley's problem with big tech when it is serving him?
Well, so Josh Hawley projects himself as a populist. That is, that he is going to advance, he's going to represent, he's going to argue in favor of the interests of what he calls the common man and woman. In other words, another way of putting it, and he actually uses the term working people, the working class. Now, what he does, and this was what makes him so fascinating. Look, he lined up with Trump from start to finish. Okay, that's well known.
Okay, so so everybody's very clear. Josh Hawley is a Trumpist, and probably even further than Donald Trump. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, and consider this. The momentous January 6th, right? Hawley already made clear he was going to go into the Congress and dissent on the Electoral College vote. He was going to vote no on accepting the vote.
Correct.
Okay. As he approached the Congress, as this crowd, which soon became this insurrectionary mob, was forming, he walked by, and there's a famous photo. I probably should have said, put this up when you get the chance, but anyhow, where he gives a fist bump to the crowd to encourage them, right?
Is that's the image that you have on this article of the article? Okay, David, I'm gonna shoot you that link, and you might can pull it up. We'll put it in post, most certainly, and tell us about. So that's January 6th.
That's January 6th, and as a consequence of that, the book contract that he had with Simon and Schuster, was pulled from him, and he brought the book out with the very conservative, in fact, in some fashion, very decidedly reactionary press, Reagnery, Regnery. Right now, this is,
and when you say reactionary, and because we're getting into the weeds, and I want to make sure everyone can come with us, because no, and I know we need the nuance, but I just want to make sure that everybody's with us. When you say reactionary, we're talking about the type of people, the reactionary thought of the people Think of Charlottesville, the
Yes.
people who marched with the tiki torches and the
Right.
khaki pants. Those are reactionaries. So Josh Hawley aligns with the reactionary Donald Trump faction of society. He had his book pulled because of his support for January 6th. And now instead he's going after big tech. But big tech is still in favor. I mean, Ben Shapiro,
Well,
there was an article from NPR that showed that Ben Shapiro has built an entire Facebook empire. Big tech has been good to conservatism. So why is
yes,
he coming after them?
because keep this in mind. What he's planning on running for president, I'm sure of it.
Mm,
And his goal, look, Hawley recognizes what all too many people in the Democratic Party for all too many decades have either refused to understand or have run away from. And that is that working people, whether they're white, black, or brown, okay, whatever their aspirations are, know who, in quotes, their class enemy is. And when I
mm,
say that, what I mean is that they work for companies that don't pay them what they're worth, okay, that
mm.
treat them, especially during this pandemic, we've seen the kinds of treatment that Amazon and other companies have subjected workers in the warehouses and else. So he's trying to appeal to those working people who voted for Trump to begin with because they were just plain angry at the Democrats. I mean, he knows this. I've been talking about this for years. And what really then freaked me out as I read this book is how he presents the story of America in a way which Democrats themselves, even Democratic Socialist Bernie Sanders and progressive Elizabeth Warren and others, refused to talk in these terms. And this is what I've been, as you know, I've been doing this with you for some time. It is, to me, shocking how the Democrats turned their back on the progressive tradition, truly progressive social democratic tradition of Franklin Roosevelt, of the New Deal years. And moreover, it was Roosevelt himself who had a real understanding of history. At one point, he said, the Republicans have abandoned Abraham Lincoln. We should make him one of our own. So in other words, so think about this. So I thought, well, wait a minute. Where's Hawley? What is he seeking to do? So in fact, he's in many ways, though he's aligned with the Trump folks, he's not a Trumpster exactly. He wants to be the next Ronald Reagan. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that. Ronald Reagan was a master of the use and abuse of the past. Okay. I mean, he was brilliant at talking about the past.
Okay. I'm with you.
So, okay, as a way of literally calling on Americans, and this is Reagan's words, not Trump's. It was Reagan who said, "Join me in the crusade to make America great again." And basically he used the past as a way of encouraging people to understand that they
Okay,
should.
pause,
Yes,
because I
I know
need to.
this.
You just told us that the phrase "Make America Great Again" actually came from Ronald Reagan.
It was his campaign slogan in 1980.
In 1980, Donald Trump co-opted it again. Well, I mean, it's right in the the intellectual precursor to Donald Trump. And
Right.
you're saying that Josh Hawley is saying, I'm going to skip over trying to be the next Trump. I'm going all the way back to the originator, the Ronald Reagan.
Right. Hawley is a very smart and thus all the more dangerous character. He was an undergraduate at Stanford. He went to Yale Law School. This is not a lightweight guy. Okay. This is not even his first book. His first book was a study of Theodore Roosevelt, which was like an undergraduate thesis that he wrote. So what he does in this book, I'm not going to read much, but I just want to read to people. Listen to this, how basically he's grabbing hold of history to empower working people to think of him as the new Ronald Reagan or the new populist leader. Big tech looms large as any corporate power in American history, as large as the railroads from a century back. And I'll skip some lines. Its sway is prodigious. Its reach is wide. And yet, like those earlier monopolies, big tech's power is ultimately precarious because Americans are never long contented to be ruled over by barons. They agitate, they protest, they rebel against it. That is what is happening now. And that is why there is cause for hope.
Okay. I need it only for the sake of time. I need us to cut to the essential here, because you're hitting on something that I think is critical for my audience to hear and everyone to hear, because what you're saying is that Josh Hawley is not dumb like Trump.
Right.
He is very intelligent. He knows history, and he's using the power of history, just like Ronald Reagan. And he's now co-opting the populist language of like an FDR, but he's trying to make it synonymous with, basically, he's trying to give us a nationalistic form, a way of viewing an economic populism.
Yes.
Would you?
Yes, I would. But I want to add something really crucial, Ben, and that it's this. People don't realize that when Ronald Reagan ran for president, he was not the hero or the champion of the Eastern corporate establishment. Big capital did not want Ronald Reagan to be president. They wanted George H.W. Bush.
That's right. I remember that.
That's first.
Well, I remember studying that. That was the year I was born. Go ahead.
Yes. Second, Ronald Reagan ran against the Republican establishment of his own party. So think about Hawley. He's running against basically the corporate establishment, big tech, and he's also running against his own party. So that working people, and by the way, don't forget, Trump actually saw an increase in votes among people of color this past time around, not radically so, but so. And so Hawley's got in mind, he's going to try to win the white working class vote. And maybe, given the nature of these past few years, he'll even sort of pull in all the more in spite of his obviously racialist politics.
That's it right there. That's the last part, because when you tell me that Josh Hawley is aligning with the reactionaries, that tells me that he is the smart version of Donald Trump, that he would leverage those same people from Charlottesville, but he would leverage them in a way that gives them some type of intellectual precursor, some philosophical underpinnings to make them feel smart and justified. So I have to ask you this last question before we go to this break. How is he unsatisfied with everything that Facebook and social media and tech is giving to conservatives? Because the algorithm is in the faith. It prefers conservative reactionary thought.
Well, he too buys into this idea that this is all part of this corporate and liberal establishment kind of plan to drive conservatism out of the public square, which also then enables him to appeal to folks who are indeed just plain old right-wing Republicans and could care less about working class needs.
Oh.
I mean, what's fascinating, look, the tragedy here, and I wrote this, and I have to tell you that I didn't do this with the idea that I'm going to reveal to the Hawley or even Trump voters what's really going on. I'm trying to tell people on the left, whether they're liberals, progressives, or radical, whatever they want to call themselves, that we have left behind the history that's ours. And we have got to start, as you've heard me say all too many times probably, we have got to start talking about the degree to which this has been a radical story, the story of America. For all of it, the exploitation and oppression, the fact is that we did overcome along the way because of struggles from below. And we have to remind people that the way forward is not simply to vote, but it's to get organized and not allow the Democrats to be so either ignorant or suppressive of the story of America that is ours. We've got
the radical story of America.
Yes, well, sorry. Yes, indeed. As you know, I mean, my book is titled "Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again." I mean, we've got to cultivate a narrative that extends from the American Revolution and Tom Paine all the way through to the likes of A. Philip Randolph and so on and so forth.
Yes. Absolutely. I would love to have you on one day with Brother Carl Mack as we talk about that history and how dangerous it is for conservatives to co-opt the radical history of the United States, especially when they're co-opting it in a way that is going to be suppressive to marginalized groups across the globe. And I think that's the warning that you're giving us in your article on Common Dreams entitled "Josh Hawley Throws a Challenge at Big Tech and the Left." Professor Harvey Kaye, I got to have you back as soon as possible. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. You're brilliant.